I have 3 questions for you. First, what is the true nature of the Greater Will? Is it an all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipotent creator-type god, or is it something else altogether? Second, what exactly is the Golden Order? What are its rules, commandments, and proscriptions? What kind of world is it trying to create and why? And third, and I think most important, what were the writers trying to accomplish with the Greater Will and the Golden Order? What is their purpose in this story? What narrative themes are being explored here? To answer those questions, we are going to start a brand new playthrough of Elden Ring together, and we are going to pretend as if we have never played the game before, as if we have never heard of the Greater Will or the Golden Order. We are wide-eyed and naive and full of childish innocence as we set off on our journey. That way, we can follow the Greater Will story step by step, as it would be experienced by a new player. We can answer questions like, when and how does the game first introduce us to the Greater Will? Which information is shared with us first? How is its nature gradually revealed to the audience? What do the writers want us to feel about the Greater Will, and how do they want our feelings to change over the course of the adventure? Okay, so let's get started. The Greater Will is first mentioned by name in the first minute of the game. It appears in the opening cinematic. So let's watch some of that opening cinematic together, and as you watch, I want you to ask yourself, what would my first impression of the Greater Will be here at the very start of the game? What about its character has been revealed to us so far? Okay, here it is.
The great Elden Ring was shattered. Queen Marika the Eternal is nowhere to be found. Soon, Marika's offspring, demigods all, claimed the shards of the Elden Ring. The mad taint of their newfound strength triggered the shattering. A war leading to abandonment by the Greater Will.
That's it. That's all we get. The Greater Will is mentioned by name, but we are not told what it is. We are not told anything about its origins, history, powers, or motivations. All we know is that a war between the demigods led to abandonment by the Greater Will, but that actually tells us quite a bit. Firstly, that the Greater Will, whatever it is already long gone by the start of the game. Therefore, it will not play an active role in the story going forward, though its role in the history of the Lands Between is still extremely important. Also, abandonment implies intelligence. It implies conscious thought, choice, decision-making, independence. From this, we know that when it has been offended or injured or spurned, the Greater Will can grab its ball, flip everybody the bird, and say, "Screw you guys, I'm going home." That opening cinematic does not explain the Greater Will's reasoning for abandoning this land, only that it had something to do with the Shattering, that war between the demigods which followed the destruction of something called the Elden Ring. And at this point, we don't know what that is either. As brand new players, we don't know very much about anything. And that is, of course, an intentional choice by the writers. They are providing us with a very basic outline of past events, and then leaving the rest of the details blank. They are giving us a mystery to explore. We have to go find the rest of the details on our own. To do so, we are going to explore the Lands Between, a wasteland kingdom populated largely by either mindless zombies or insane people, where nearly every single village, cathedral, and fortress lies in ruins, where everything wants to kill us. As we explore Limgrave, the first region of this kingdom, we will find several characters who discuss something called the Golden Order, but at this point we don't know what the connection between this Golden Order and the Greater Will might be, or if there is any connection at all. For that reason, I am going to save my discussion of the Golden Order until later in the video. It is not until after we defeat the horrifying Godric the Grafted, a demigod and the tyrannical ruler over Stormvale Castle and Limgrave, and take his Great Rune, which is a piece of the broken Elden Ring, that we are finally allowed into the inner chamber of of the Round Table Hold, which is the name of the headquarters of Tarnished Champions, of which we are a member. Here, we finally meet a character who can tell us more about the Greater Will. Of course, you can defeat the demigods in any order and still get the same dialogue, but for this video, just assume we beat Godric first. Alright, so in the inner chamber we have an audience with the Two Fingers, who are a pair of sentient, giant, rotting fingers who serve as the leader and guide of the Tarnished Warriors at the Round Table Hold. This is Enya, a finger reader. The Two Fingers do not have mouths because they're fingers, so they communicate through vibrations. It is Enya's job to interpret those vibrations and let us know what these things are saying. And she is the first character in the entire game who mentions the Greater Will by name, so let's listen to her dialogue together. And as you listen, ask yourself, what information are the writers revealing about the Greater Will here, and how do they want the audience to react? Okay, here it is.
Are you that new Tarnished? You've done well. I am Enya the Finger Reader. I interpret the words of the fingers, envoys to the Greater Will. Look there. The fingers tremble to welcome you, Shardbearer. Let their wisdom wash over you.
Great Elden Ring, root of the Golden Order, anchor of all lands, giver of grace, wellspring of all joy. Until it was shattered, the tragic corruption of the Order has taken its toll. Across the realm, life lies in ruin, fallen to pieces. Foul curses and misery spread, unabating. But the Greater Will has not abandoned the realm, nor the life that inhabits it. So it is that the Tarnished are guided by grace, called to act. Brave Tarnished, your great rune is a handsome shard of the Elden Ring. Seek another of its kind, to become Elden Lord and restore the Golden Order.
Let the words of the fingers guide you.
This giant, rotting, sentient pair of fingers are envoys of the Greater Will. The Greater Will never appears in person in the game. It always acts through proxies and messengers. But why giant fingers? It's such a bizarre choice by the developers, right? Well, hands and fingers are a common symbol in poetry and fiction and art, and they can represent all sorts of different ideas, and that meaning can change depending on the form the fingers take. For example, a closed fist means something very different than an open palm. A hand holding a farming tool is very different than a hand holding a rifle. A hand reaching out towards a lover or even towards the divine is a common symbol of longing and connection. In general, hands and fingers tend to represent how characters interact with their world. Aristotle called the hands the tool of tools. It is humanity's use of tools that has allowed us dominion over the natural world, and the hands are the greatest tool of all. It is our fingers, complex, flexible, and strong, with which we manipulate our surroundings. So I think that, in the same way that humans use our hands to impose our will upon our surroundings, the Greater Will is literally using its hands to impose its will upon humanity. Of course, it is significant that there are only 2 fingers here. Eventually, we will encounter a 3 fingers, which suggests at some point in the past, the divinity was split. There was some sort of breaking point or disagreement, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's return to Enya's dialogue. Through her, the fingers speak to us directly, and they say something very surprising. They insist that the Greater Will has not abandoned the realm, and according to the fingers, that is why the Tarnished have been blessed with guidance, because the Greater Will wants us to claim more great runes, and use their power to restore the Elden Ring and thus restore the world itself. Now, this is is confusing because we were just told in the opening cinematic very explicitly that the Greater Will did abandon the realm. So what is the truth? And why would the writers choose to give us such conflicting information? Well, eventually it will be revealed that the Two Fingers are absolutely not a reliable source of information, something observant players may have already begun to suspect. Notice the rotten open wounds on their flesh. They are not healthy, which suggests that their guidance is not pure. They are just as broken as the world they are intended to guide. But at this point, we don't have enough information to know what's really going on. This is something I really love about From Software's narrative style. Their stories always feel like investigations, like the audience is a detective working through the evidence. In the Two Fingers dialogue, notice the glowing language it uses to describe the Greater Will and the Elden Ring. Wellspring of all joy. The language is really over the top here. We are basically being told that the Greater Will and its Elden Ring are the source of all that is good in this world, and that the shattering of the Elden Ring is the source of all misery. We are told that if we can just fix that ring, it will solve all of the world's problems. A lot of players will already be suspicious. This sounds way too good to be true, and you will likely already have found evidence that the society the Greater Will established was not an equal one, and many groups of people already experienced plenty of misery even before the Elden Ring was destroyed. But we'll discuss that more later. Anyway, Enya and the Fingers still have more to say. Next we can ask her about the Great Runes, and this is how she responds.
Great runes are the stuff of demigods, the children of the goddess Queen Marika, she who is vessel of the Elden Ring. Tainted by the strength of their runes, her children warred, but none could become Elden Lord. And so grace was extended to your kind, the Tarnished. Listen, the Fingers speak.
The Greater Will has long renounced the demigods. Tarnished, show no mercy. Have their heads. Take all they have left.
We learn several important pieces of information here. Queen Marika, the god queen who rules over this realm, is the vessel of the Elden Ring, which is apparently an artifact of tremendous power directly related to the Greater Will, meaning Marika and the Greater Will have some sort of relationship, though we don't know what that relationship is yet. The Shattering War was a conflict between her children, who fought each other to a stalemate. This dialogue is also the first time we encounter the violence of the Greater Will. We are ordered to kill all of the demigods, cut off their heads, seize everything they possess. And this is not the last time we'll encounter that violence. Through its proxies, such as Queen Marika and her golden armies, the Greater Will violently conquered this entire realm. As you explore and learn the history of the lands between, you'll discover that every single location was the site of some terrible battle in the past. The Greater Will's armies conquered both Stormvale Castle and Castle Morn in Limgrave. They invaded the land of Liurnia at least twice, fighting vicious battles against the Carian royal family and their academy. They waged a genocidal war against the giants of the mountaintop, leaving only a single survivor in their wake. Radon fought and won a war against the stars themselves in Caelid. They banished the Nox people beneath the ground. They enslaved the misbegotten and the trolls, persecuted the Omens and the Albinorics. The Greater Will is not some benevolent god of justice and peace and diplomacy. It is a violent god of war and conquest, and that continues into the present, with a new slaughter of the demigods ordered by its envoys, the Two Fingers. But why? Why does the Greater Will want to kill all of Marika and Radagon's children? Well, going forward, we will learn that many of the demigods are actively attempting to overthrow the Golden Order, which is reason enough to want them dead. but others, like Godric and Morgott, seem to remain loyal to the Golden Order, and yet the Greater Will still wants them dead too. It seems to me that the Greater Will was deeply offended by the devastating civil war they all participated in, regardless of their motivations, and I will discuss exactly why it was so offended later in this video. Next, in our playthrough, we are going to journey to the Academy of Rhea Lucaria, towering over the region known as Liurnia, to claim another great rune from Rennala, queen of the Carian royal family. As we explore this second region, we learn about its history, and in that history, the writers are presenting us with an alternative to the Greater Will's Golden Order. Once upon a time, this land was led by astrologers and the Carian royal family, who looked not to the Greater Will, but to the stars for guidance, who established a totally separate culture and society. And there are others here too. In Liurnia, we can also find Vare, who is eventually revealed to be a champion of the Lord of Blood, part of the beginning of a brand new dynasty established outside of the Golden Order. We also meet Hyetta, a wannabe finger maiden who is guided by a distant, mysterious light, which is later revealed to be the frenzied flame of the Three Fingers. And most fascinating of all, we can find Ranni the Witch. Ranni is a former demigod who cast aside her body, her great rune, and all connection to the Greater Will, who has chosen to let her fate instead be guided by the stars like the Carians of old. But again, we'll talk about her more later. What is important now is the realization that this is not a monotheistic world. The Greater Will is just one of many gods, and perhaps the player will already begin to ask themselves, is the Greater Will truly the best choice to continue governing the lands between? After we claim Renala's great rune and return to the Round Table Hold, we will have another audience with the Two Fingers and new dialogue from Enya. In this dialogue, the Two Fingers claim that the Greater Will is pleased with us. We are told that because of our stunning victories, we have been granted the right to become the next monarch. We are instructed to journey up to the Altus Plateau, land of the Erdtree's blessings, and from there to Leyndell, the royal capital, centerpiece of the Golden Order, to enter the Erdtree itself, have an audience with Queen Marika inside, and claim our new title, Elden Lord. Then we can ask Enya about Queen Marika, and this is what she says.
Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision. A god in truth. But after the Elden Ring's shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erdtree, a grim punishment for shattering the Order. Despite her godhood, the fingers speak.
Marika's trespass demanded a heavy sentence. But even in shackles, she remains a god and the vision's vessel. Confer great runes to become Elden Lord and join Queen Marika as her consort. The fingers have willed it so.
We were already aware that Queen Marika was the vessel of the Elden Ring, and also that she was the one who shattered it, but now we learn something new. After destroying the Elden Ring, she was punished by the Greater Will. The reason she has disappeared is because the Greater Will has sealed her inside of the Erdtree. And yet, even more fascinating, despite this punishment, she remains a god. She remains the vessel of the Elden Ring. This tells us something very interesting about the Greater Will. It seems as if the Greater Will cannot act directly in the lands between. It can only influence events from a distance. For some reason, it has to act through proxies like Marika, the Two Fingers, or our player character. But what happens when one of those proxies, someone it has blessed with immortality and tremendous power, turns against it, becomes its enemy? Well, apparently, for all its supposed power, the Greater Will cannot do very much in that situation. It cannot strip Marika of her godhood. It cannot take the Elden Ring away from her. It cannot even kill her. All it can do is seal her inside the Erdtree to prevent her from doing any further damage. When her children, the demigods, also choose to reject its order and wage a civil war against each other, it has no means of stopping them either. All it can do is, apparently, call upon the Tarnished, a people it rejected long ago, and task them with slaughtering absolutely everyone in order to take back control of the situation. This is clearly a desperate last act with no guarantee of success. Not the sort of move an all-powerful, omnipotent god would make, because of course the Greater Will is not an all-powerful, omnipotent god. Its powers are actually surprisingly limited. And all of this is assuming that the Greater Will has not already given up and abandoned the lands between in the first place. But we'll discuss that possibility more later. To learn more about just how vulnerable the Greater Will really is, next we are going to examine one of its most dangerous enemies, Ranni the Witch. Let's imagine that, after acquiring your first 2 great runes, you choose to follow Ranni's questline from beginning to end. You meet her at her ancestral home, the Carian Manor, and you pledge yourself to her service. Ranni states that she was the one who stole the Rune of Death, who engineered the plot to murder Godwyn the Golden, the event which sparked the Civil War. She has entrusted her fate to the stars, and most mysteriously of all, to a pale, cold moon she discovered in her studies, a strange celestial body of unknown origin or nature. She tasks us with retrieving a deadly artifact known as the Finger Slayer Blade from the depths of the ancient city of Nokron. Okay, so Nokron was built by a people called the Nox. According to the Nox armor, long ago the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars and their Lord of Night. They also constructed the Mirror Helms, which according to their description, ward off the intervention of the Greater Will and its vassal fingers. What all this means is that the Nox were another enemy of the Greater Will, but their rebellion failed and ended with them banished underground. When you finally find the Finger Slayer Blade, its description reads, "This blood-drenched fetish is proof of the high treason committed by the Eternal City, and symbolizes its downfall. Cannot be wielded by those without a fate, but is said to be able to harm the Greater Will and its vassals." I've seen a lot of people express confusion as to what exactly Ranni's goals are, but I think this description makes it very clear. She is going to use the Finger Slayer Blade to first kill the 2 fingers, and then to kill the Greater Will itself. She will journey across the stars to do it. She will commit blasphemy and treason to slay a god of gods. I will do a full video on Ranni's character someday, where we will fully analyze her motivations and development, but for now, for the purposes of this video, what we have learned here is that the Greater Will has created numerous enemies throughout its long and often bloody rule over the lands between, and at least one of those enemies has acquired the power to destroy it. It will eventually become clear that Marika herself probably aided Ranni's treason, since it was her own kinsman who fought on Ranni's side during the Night of Black Knives. Later in Ranni's questline, she states that she and 2 of the other demigods were Empyreans, which is a title reserved for those who the 2 fingers have chosen as candidates for godhood, which suggests that the Greater Will was already searching for a replacement for Marika from among her children, searching for a new vessel for its Elden Ring. Perhaps because their relationship had already soured. As we continue, we'll find more characters who despise the Greater Will or have chosen alternative paths, like the Recusants at the Volcano Manor, or Mohg's Bloody Fingers, or the forces gathered at Miquella's Erdtree. But why? Why do all of these characters hate the Greater Will? Well, we'll discuss that in more detail when we discuss the so-called Golden Order. For now, we are going to take a little detour. In our playthrough, we are going to travel from the ancient city of Nokron to a place called the Deep Root Depths. because here we can obtain a very important piece of information. If you are an extremely thorough explorer, you can find the Elden Star's incantation here, whose description reads, "It is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star, bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring." From this description, we learn the origins of the Elden Ring. It arrived on this planet on the back of a falling star. It is not only an alien object, but actually an alien life form. It was a beast, a living creature, descended from the celestial heavens. That means that the Greater Will which sent it must be some sort of intelligent being that exists out there among the stars. That probably explains why it cannot influence events directly in the lands between, why it has to act through proxies, why it seems so impotent at times. It is not here. It is not a terrestrial being. It lives very far away. We are not dealing with a typical generic Judeo-Christian or Greco-Roman type of god here. We are dealing with a cosmic god whose nature and origins are so alien that we will probably never fully understand them. We just learned that this game's story is not just dark fantasy, but a type of cosmic horror too. And if you want to learn more about that, I did a whole video on it, so go check it out. With all of this knowledge in hand, we finally journey to Leyndell, the royal capital, the center of the golden and glorious civilization that was created through Queen Marika and the Greater Will's bloody conquests. In Leyndell, we are shown a physical demonstration of the kind of world the Greater Will is trying to build. It is golden, it is beautiful, it is wondrous, it is orderly and organized, it is pure and blessed. It is easy to see why so many were seduced by the Greater Will's influence, but Leyndell has a dark underbelly hidden beneath its shining surface. If you journey down into the city's sewers, you will find a place called the Shunning Grounds. These are the Omens, an intelligent humanoid race. They are distinguished by both their immense physical strength and by the twisting horns that grow across their bodies. If you travel deep enough, you can find the Three Fingers and their frenzied flame here too, but I'm going to save a discussion of them for another video. Just know that the Three Fingers offer another alternative to the Greater Will. The Three Fingers recognize the horrific suffering of this world and offer a radical solution, a solution that is perhaps even worse than the problem it is trying to solve. Anyway, the Omens are despised and hated by both the people of Leyndell and seemingly the Greater Will itself for these unusual physical traits. They are forced to live in the sewers among the filth and rubbish, feces and urine of those who live in the golden streets above. Their horns are forcefully and violently cut off, sometimes killing the Omen in the process. I think the developers wanted the audience to feel disgusted, or at least unsettled, by this dramatic disparity, by the horrific persecution inflicted on the Omens. I think they expect us to question whether the world Marika and the Greater Will have built is really as glorious and noble and honorable as we were previously led to believe. And I think this is a good time to begin our deep dive into the Golden Order. Okay, so the Golden Order is, very simply, the way in which the Greater Will and Queen Marika have ordered the world, how they organized society here on a macro level. In this Golden Order, society is very broadly divided into two categories: those who are deemed worthy of receiving the blessings of the Erdtree, and those who are deemed unworthy. For example, the humans living in Leyndell are deemed worthy, while the Omens are not. The worthy live in glory and beauty and splendor, are bathed in blessings and heavenly grace, are free to live any life they choose. Meanwhile, the unworthy are forced to live in filth, misery, and subjugation. But to fully understand the Golden Order, we need to rewind all the way back to the beginning of our adventure in the lands between, back to our initial exploration of the region of Limgrave. Back then, one of the first characters we can meet in Limgrave calls himself D. He is a Golden Order fundamentalist and hunter of the dead. He is a religious zealot who wields violence to force the world to adhere to the Golden Order's principles, or at least as he understands them. Just listen to some of his dialogue.
I serve the Golden Order, that I might put this crooked land to rights, following only the guidance of the Great Elden Ring. Those who live in death fall outside the principles of the Golden Order. Their mere existence sullies the guidance of gold, tainting its truth. And so it is the vermin must be exterminated, down to the very last.
He refers to those who live outside the Golden Order as vermin, who must be totally exterminated. There is no room for negotiation, peace, or nuance in his simplistic black and white worldview. Either you are accepted by the Golden Order or you are destroyed. There is no middle ground. He has chosen those who live in death as the focus of his violent purges. Those who live in death are people who died and then whose bodies were touched by Deathroot, a strange form of plant that grows out of the deformed and still living corpse of Godwyn. When a corpse is touched by this plant, it is reanimated. These people did not choose to be reanimated, it just happened to them by accident. They are not evil, their existence isn't hurting anyone, but that doesn't matter to a fundamentalist like D. All that matters is that their very existence has been deemed heretical by the Golden Order, and so they will be viciously slaughtered without mercy. And this is not the last concerning example of the Golden Order's violence that we can find in Limgrave. If you travel to the very southernmost tip of this region, you will arrive at the imposing Castle Morn. This castle has been overrun by a group of creatures called the Misbegotten. These Misbegotten were formerly the servants or possibly slaves of the humans who commanded the castle. There is strong evidence that these servants were brutally mistreated and possibly even tortured by their human overlords, which is why the Misbegotten revolted and slaughtered every single human they could find. The Misbegotten are actually very similar to the Omens. Just like the Omens, they are humanoid and intelligent, but through no fault of their own were born with twisted bodies. They have scales and wings and claws and tails. Just like the Omens and those who live in death, the Misbegotten happen to fall outside the Golden Order and so are forced to live lives of misery and slavery. At this point in the story, we do not know why the Greater Will seems to despise the Omens and Misbegotten, but its reasons will become clear later. Another race which seems to fall outside the Golden Order are the Albinorics, pale-blooded humanoids who may or may not have been artificially created by sorcerers. All of the Albinorics who lived in this village in Liurnia were brutally slaughtered by forces loyal to Gideon, the self-appointed leader of the Round Table Hold and favored champion of the Two Fingers. Albinorics are another group forced to live on the fringes of society by the Greater Will. The Trolls might be yet another example. Through all of this, it becomes clear that the Golden Order is a society of the haves and the have-nots, where some people are blessed and others cursed for arbitrary and unfair reasons. The Golden Order is terrible. It is tyrannical. It condones genocide and slavery. And yet, things are not quite that simple. From Software never tells simplistic black and white stories about obvious good guys and bad guys. Even the most despicable of characters will always have some redeeming quality, which complicates their portrayal in the narrative, and it's the same with the Golden Order. While exploring Stormvale Castle, you can encounter a spellsword named Roger, and let's listen to a bit of his dialogue, because it reveals something really fascinating about the complicated nature of the Golden Order.
The battle art you've learned is of the Glintstone family. They were conceived at the Great Academy of Rea Lucaria, to the north of this castle. In the past, they obeyed laws which contravened the Golden Order, or so I'm told. Fascinating, isn't it? That the Golden Order was pliable enough to absorb practices that contradicted itself in the past. With the Order broken, twisted, and in need of repair, such adaptability is more important now than ever.
Once upon a time, the forces of the Golden Order waged war against the Carian royals of Liurnia, but then they made peace. The Golden Order was flexible enough to change, to bend, to allow the sorcerers of Rea Lucaria to find a place within its rigid hierarchy. This reveals another side of the Golden Order. It is not just violent tyranny. There is a possibility of diplomacy, peace, and flexibility. Another example can be found in the character of Kenneth Haight, a noble of Limgrave. Kenneth Haight is able to negotiate and make peace with the demi-humans. Yet another intelligent humanoid race in the lands between. In his dialogue, he explicitly states that there is a place for the demi-humans within the Golden Order. And let's take another look at D, the religious zealot who wishes to slaughter all of those who live in death. If you follow his questline all the way to the end, it is eventually suggested that he and his younger brother share a single soul, something that marks them as different from everyone else in this world. They are truly unique and strange. According to the description of his sword, the inseparable twins found solace in the Golden Order, the only institution not to revile them as accursed beings. According to this description, the Golden Order is actually more accepting of certain kinds of people than any other institution in this setting. That is why D is such a zealot. He is trying to defend the only institution which offered he and his brother acceptance. So, the Golden Order is complicated. It blesses just as often as it curses, it heals just as often as it wounds, it forges peace and stability just as often as it slaughters and subjugates. Something that is important to understand is that the Golden Order is not a code of laws. It is not a set of clearly written commandments set in stone. It does not come shipped with a set of assembly instructions like a sofa from IKEA. Mystery is at the core of the Golden Order's characterization. Even the most knowledgeable characters in the game struggle to understand it. It is very possible for two different characters to have two very different understandings of how the Golden Order actually works. The first time you will encounter this mystery is with the character of Corrin. So Corrin is a sort of monk who worships the Golden Order as if it were a religion. And he's not the only one. Characters across the lands between treat the Erdtree, the Greater Will, and the Golden Order with religious reverence. However, others, like some of the Golden Order fundamentalists, including Marika herself, do not worship the Golden Order with blind faith. They treat it more as a subject of academic or even scientific study, which is why the Golden Order seal scales with the intelligence stat. But let's get back to Corrin. In his first dialogue, he says that he is exploring the secrets of the Golden Order, so that he can counsel a future Elden Lord as to its proper form. This guy has dedicated his entire life to studying the Golden Order, and according to this dialogue, even he does not fully understand it yet. If you follow his quest line, Corrin eventually leaves the Round Table Hold to become the apprentice and scribe of an even more celebrated scholar of the secrets of the Golden Order, a man known only as Goldmask. Over time, it becomes clear that Corrin and Goldmask actually have very different ideas about what is and is not allowed under the tenets of the Order. Goldmask is willing to delve into the true identity of Radagon, to ascend the forbidden mountaintop of the giants, to suggest that the Golden Order is fundamentally flawed and needs to be mended with new ideas. Having his beliefs challenged eventually causes Corrin to despair and eventually go insane. But the mystery of the Golden Order does not end there. Throughout your journey in the lands between, your traveling partner, a bodiless spirit named Melina, who is probably the daughter of Marika, can occasionally share echoes of Marika's past proclamations. Outside of Leyndell, she shares some particularly fascinating dialogue that we are going to listen to together now.
In Marika's own words, I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter?
In this proclamation, Marika declares her intent to study the mysteries of the Golden Order. This is kind of crazy. Marika is the champion of the Greater Will. More than anyone else in the world, she is responsible for spreading its Golden Order across the lands between. Through vicious conquest and persistent warfare, she personally established its dominion over this world. She even holds its Elden Ring inside of her very body. And this is a good time to talk a bit about what the Elden Ring really is. Okay, so the Elden Ring is a collection of magical runes, and these runes appear to have the power to alter reality. For example, when Marika removes the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, she also removes natural death from the lands between. In this way, both she and the Greater Will use the Elden Ring as a tool to force the world to adhere to its Golden Order, to bend the laws of nature to its authority. And again, Marika is holding these runes inside her body. But according to this dialogue, even she did not actually know the true nature of the Golden Order. It's only after she has finished conquering the lands between, forging its kingdom, spreading its influence to every corner of this realm, that she finally sits down and says, you know what, maybe we should figure out what this thing actually is. And whatever she found in her quest for the truth caused her to turn against the Greater Will, to become its greatest enemy, to surreptitiously support Ranni's rebellion, to shatter the Elden Ring itself, and in doing so shatter her own body. We don't know what Marika found, only that it must have been something really terrible for her to have such a dramatic change of heart, to do something as explosive and self-destructive as shattering the Elden Ring. But why? Why did the writers and the developers choose to make mystery such a central characteristic of the Greater Will and its Golden Order? Why not just tell the player exactly what it is and what it wants? Well, if you've seen my video on the cosmic horror elements of Elden Ring, you'll know that I firmly believe Elden Ring is a cosmic horror story, and uncertainty and mystical dangerous knowledge are at the core of the cosmic horror genre. This uncertainty creates a narrative where the audience can never be sure of their footing, of what is right and what is wrong, even of the basic nature of reality. In this way, cosmic horror stories can reflect the uncertainty we might feel in our own lives. Like, how many of us can claim to actually be totally certain of our place in the world, of where we fit into the grand scheme of existence itself? The Greater Will's mystery gives us a fictional version of that same anxiety and confusion. Now it's time for us to fast forward again, back to where we left off our playthrough. Remember, we were exploring the ruined royal capital of Leyndell. We had been told by the Two Fingers that we had earned the right to become the next Elden Lord, and restore the Elden Ring and the Golden Order. So up and up we go to the top of the capital. We defeat Morgott, the veiled monarch of Leyndell, and Omen, who, despite the persecution he faces, still chooses to defend the Golden Order. Morgott is a fascinating character, but we don't have time to dig into his story right now. Anyway, we defeat him, march up to the Erdtree, and then something unexpected happens. We do not become the next Elden Lord, because, despite what the Two Fingers promised, when we actually reach it, the Erdtree rejects us. We are repelled by indestructible thorns. The Two Fingers were wrong. Everything they told us must now be questioned. So we return to the Round Table Hold and speak to Enya, and this is what she says.
Well, you managed to return. You know what this means. The Erdtree has spurned you. The Fingers remain still. Shaken by this turn of events, they are busy consulting the Greater Will. When they are finished, the Fingers will again offer their guidance. But thousands, if not tens of thousands, of moons must first pass. No matter for me, but you. How will you ever manage to wait? My, oh my.
It turns out that the Two Fingers are totally unreliable. They were just guessing at what the Greater Will wanted, and this time they guessed wrong. Enya says that it may take decades or even centuries for them to complete their communion with the Greater Will, which begs the question, if it takes so long to make a phone call, when was the last time they actually spoke? When was the last time the Two Fingers received a direct communication from their god? Have they been acting on their own this entire time? This turn of events confirms what we were told all the way back in the opening cinematic. The Greater Will absolutely has abandoned the lands between. It washed its hands of the whole situation and disappeared back into the distant stars from whence it had come, leaving behind a legacy of tyranny and civil war. What could have caused such a dramatic departure? Well, we will get to that answer soon enough. For now, we are going to burn down the Erdtree to force our way inside. We will storm the Erdtree, defeat Radagon, who is the last bulwark standing between us and the Elden Ring, the Greater Will's last zealous champion, and once he has been defeated, we will do battle against the Elden Ring itself, this incredible cosmic being whose body is composed of starlight, who wields Radagon's spine as a sword, is the Elden Beast. And remember, according to the Elden Star's incantation, the Elden Ring's original form was that of a living beast that rode a falling star to the earth. So this creature is the Elden Ring in its original living form. When we defeat the Elden Beast, we receive the Elden Remembrance, whose description reads, "It was the vassal beast of the Greater Will, and living incarnation of the concept of order." I think this description reveals the true nature of the Greater Will. Okay, so if you watched my video examining the cosmic horror themes of Elden Ring, you'll know that I believe that the rot god which infected Melania and the Caelid region is actually the formless divine essence of decay itself. And so, anywhere decay exists, so will the rot god, which is why it infected Melania in the first place. Well, I think the Greater Will's true nature is something very similar. I think the Greater Will is the divine essence of order, somehow given form, given life, given intelligence. And I think this explains why the Greater Will came to the Lands Between in the first place, why it despises both the Omens and the Misbegotten, and why it ultimately abandoned the kingdom. There are multiple item descriptions in the game that describe something called the Crucible. Before the age of the Erdtree, before the Erdtree existed at all, there was something called the Crucible, a primordial bed of life, twisted and chaotic. As the divine incarnation of order itself, the Greater Will naturally seeks to spread order, so it makes perfect sense why it would send its Elden Beast to bring order to the disorderly Crucible. The Omens and the Misbegotten have been touched by the primordial Crucible. That's why their bodies are twisted and chaotic. Because the Greater Will hates disorder in all its forms, it hates them too. It excludes them from its new shining golden order. And then when Queen Marika, for whatever reason, ultimately rejects that order, literally shatters it to pieces, and then sparks a civil war that is pure chaos, the Greater Will is either offended or perhaps literally repelled, forced to flee. The Shattering War was chaotic and destructive. Wars are always chaotic, but civil wars are often even worse. The Greater Will had forged a very orderly and organized society, but the civil war between the demigods destroyed all of that, tore it all down, turned it all into violent mayhem. Such a chaotic environment would be the antithesis of the Greater Will's very existence. It is possible that it literally cannot sustain itself in such a place. Its influence naturally withers away or retreats, and that is why it seems to have abandoned the realm. But what is the narrative purpose of all this? What is the meaning of this story? What are its themes? How did the writers want us to feel or react? Well, the fictional history of the Golden Order in Elden Ring reminds me of the real history of the Roman Empire. Something that the ancient Romans felt set them apart from other peoples was their rule of law. Ancient Roman society was ruled by a dizzying web of precedent, tradition, courts, judges, bureaucracy, law codes, and government proclamations. They felt that this rule of law was one of the things that separated them from the barbarians. What made them better than the barbarians? What made them civilized? When the Romans violently conquered half the world, they brought this rule of law with them. They brought order to a disorderly world. Many Western countries can still trace their modern system of laws all the way back to the ancient Roman Republic. It is one of the foundations of Western civilization. It is central to our understanding of what civilization is. And this is not unique to the Romans. Every empire in history has done this. They are always ruled by some system of laws, which they always consider superior to their neighbors. And when they violently conquer those neighbors, they bring their rule of law with them as if it is some sort of gift. All empires do this. The ancient Chinese and Persian dynasties, the Arab Caliphate, the European colonial empires, the Soviet Union, the American government. It is a universal characteristic of empires. And if you study history, you can find countless examples of times when rule of law becomes tyranny. There is a thin line between prosecuting the law and unfairly persecuting those who arbitrarily fall outside of it. Sometimes rule of law is just an excuse to humiliate, torture, and steal from those who society deems unworthy. I think the developers wanted the Greater Will and its Golden Order to be a reflection of our own world's history. At times, the Golden Order seems glorious and splendorous and perfect. But just as often it seems bloody and tyrannical and horrific. When the Golden Order is flexible and willing to bend to accept different kinds of people into its embrace, for example like with the mages of Raya Lucaria, it creates peace and stability. However, when the Golden Order is inflexible, when it refuses to bend, like with the Omens and the Misbegotten, it creates suffering and misery. In some ways, I think Elden Ring is a story about the fundamental paradox of order. Societies naturally try to impose order on their surroundings, but order always gives way to disorder eventually. Natural disasters, selfish ambition, bloody warfare, and new ideas will always ultimately destroy whatever order we think we have established. The entire concept of a settled status quo is a mirage. Or it could be interpreted as a story about the way rule of law so often becomes tyranny, forcing others to do what you want them to do, to live the way you think they should live. In the end, I think the Greater Will and its Golden Order really do serve as a mirror to our own society. It is not a moral story that's trying to teach us a specific lesson. Instead, the developers are simply exploring the concept of human order, when it succeeds and when it fails. Both the incredible things it allows us to build and the terrible destruction it can wreak. There is no one right answer when it comes to the question of how to organize a society, but the game's story does seem to condemn the inflexibility of the Golden Order and to be sympathetic to more compassionate and peaceful worldviews, like those of the characters Fia and Roger, or this friendly turtle who is wearing a bishop's hat. Those who are willing to compromise and negotiate are portrayed in a far more favorable light by the story. And that is where my very long exploration of the Greater Will and the Golden Order ends. The release of the DLC is coming very soon now. I hope to get out at least one more video before it drops, probably something a lot shorter and more focused, like maybe a character analysis, maybe on Morgott or Ronnie or the Dung Eater, all of whom I think are really fascinating, but whoever it ends up being, that is a subject for next time, because this video is done.